Our first guest is Miss Kristin Belkofer. I've known Kristin for quite a while, since our days back at the Milwaukee Art Museum. She is a licensed professional counselor. She is also the founder and CEO of an amazing clinic called, and she's a clinical director, I should also mention that, called Clara Healing Institute, a holistic, multifaceted mental health private practice in Wisconsin. So she has receipts, y'all. So she's going to help us in this particular segment really start to see how can we get our mind right. So will you help me in welcoming Kristin Belkofer to the stage, to the life of the table? Please have a seat. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Dr. Laci, and thank you for your introduction and for having me in this lovely space with all these wonderful people. What a great vibe.
It is, isn't it? It feels good in here, right? Okay, so let's get into it. Before we dive all the way in, let's give you a couple of warm-ups, right? Because there may be people here, they're not familiar with you.
Absolutely.
I know you had a long way to drive to get here from Wauwatosa.
Yeah, my drive was about 4 minutes, maybe 3.
Yeah, there you go. There you go.
I live right over on 101st and Capitol, so we're neighbors.
Right, neighbors, absolutely. So those who don't know you, where did you grow up and where do you live now?
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up on the south side of Milwaukee, the area that we now refer to as Bayview. But when I was there, it didn't quite have that reputation of being so hip yet. It was very sort of blue collar area.
Okay.
So I grew up there. So I'm Milwaukee born and bred.
Nice.
And since then I've lived kind of all over the Milwaukee area, but decided to come and live in Wauwatosa, especially when I was thinking about how I might want to develop my practice that I had been dreaming and strategizing about, knowing that this is really where our community is. I have 2 children that, went through the school system here. My husband works at Mount Mary University. And so it really seemed like a good fit for us.
Love it. Thank you. All right, another tough question before we get into the meat and potatoes of why we're
Yes.
here today. Coffee or tea?
I want to say tea because I do very much love it, and I love the holistic, sort of approach to there's all these wonderful things that we can source from nature and herbs that do wonderful things, but I'm going to be very real that 100% coffee and specifically espresso.
Oh, yes, my girl, absolutely. Yeah, I've already had 1 cup today. I'll probably have at least another 1 or even 2 as the day goes on.
Absolutely. My daughter will, sometimes when she's playing and she's pretending to be me or pretending to be going to work, she'll say, I just got to pick up my almond milk latte.
I love that. I love that. They're always watching us, right?
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
let's get started and have maybe a heart-to-heart conversation for leaders.
Absolutely.
I really would like to think of this particular segment as grace to heal. So, we have Grace Over Grind as our overheader, but with your space and what you're doing, you lead Clara Healing Institute, an amazing mental health practice that is continuing to flourish and grow and expand. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
A lot of focus around trauma and trauma support. Why is healing and healing work essential for today's leaders?
Oh, absolutely. When I hear that question, I think of a few different angles on that, and a few things come to mind. The first is just thinking about the sheer pace of life and expectations right now really make it very difficult for leaders, and especially women leaders, to work in on a daily basis the practice of self-reflection, even tapping into themselves to see what they need, how their nervous system is doing, how they're feeling. This pace is so unreasonable, yet we've all become very used to it, and it's been very normalized in our culture, right? Yeah. And so I think what happens is, especially if you're in a leadership capacity where you're working towards a certain position, you're strategizing for something in your career, you're working on starting your own business or firm or something like that, you're so used to, sort of going with the pace. I just got to do whatever needs to be done. And what I think can happen is that when we don't have a lot of transition space between that, it's really easy for folks to fall into and sort of default to old behavior patterns that just don't really serve us anymore, don't serve us for this era of our lives, right? So that the pace is really something that I think is imperative to think about.
I know a lot of people talk about with COVID and everything that happened. I've heard people say, oh, COVID, even though literally 1 million people died, literally, it had some great elements to it as well, such as causing us to slow down. Are you still seeing that happening, or is it just like, nope, business as usual, get back on the grind, you're lazy if you want to work from home now?
That's a really interesting question. I would say that I'm definitely seeing people still very, very impacted by this change. So I don't get a sense that anyone that I work with or many of our clients are like snapping back to normal, even if their employers or their businesses or the population they are serving is sort of demanding that to happen. And what I see a lot of, to your point about, this horrible traumatic experience that we all strangely collectively shared, but also kept us very isolated and separate. People are still very much trying to make sense of what this meant to them and how it impacted them. So I think a lot of people are struggling more with just things like meaning and, their existence, and they're really like things can just change in a moment that we didn't really think about before. So I'm really seeing people grapple with that in a variety of ways. In some ways, that's leading people to make decisions that are much healthier for their lives, their families, their communities, taking a bit of a step back. Setting hard boundaries on, no, I am working from home. This is how I need to operate to make this work. And then there's others who I think want to bounce back, but the world is different now. Things are different. You made that comment about the war on talent that folks are experiencing. The way that people think about work is changing dramatically, and I really see that in the differences between generations.
Oh, interesting. Tell us more.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, from a generational perspective, I technically fall into the category of like elder millennial.
Okay.
But
congratulations to you.
Oh, thanks. But I'm a little bit on that cusp of Gen X and millennial, and I tend to identify with pieces of both of those things, but kind of seeing younger millennials, especially younger millennial women who now are finding themselves coming into more leadership-oriented positions or wanting to move that direction, are really like taking a hard look at, oh, this story that we were sold that you can like do anything that you want to do, and all you need to do is just work hard and grind and work harder than everybody else around you, and you'll make it work, and just keep going to school and keep doing this. A lot of people are just finding that it just doesn't work for them, and they did all of the things that they felt that society or their family or their community wanted them to do, that we see as quote unquote good or successful. They find themselves in these positions and they're like, oh my gosh, like I am not enjoying this. This is what I did all this for, to
this
work.
What I went to school for, like,
absolutely, to work 70, 80 hours a week. I happen to work with a lot of female attorneys.
Oh, interesting.
And I feel like when I think about that particular subgroup, this is something I hear about a lot. And then really having to learn on the job how to advocate for themselves with this older generation, the shareholders and the folks that are in primary leadership in the firms who are like, nope, we need you in your seat. We need you here in this boardroom. We need you looking a certain way, so on and so forth. And then they've got these younger folks coming in at, the bottom of the millennials, the top of Gen Z, and they have a very different concept of working, and in fact, at times can be more productive, right? By knowing their own rhythms and what works best for them in terms of their energy, what they need to give their best selves to their jobs, and who and what they're serving. But there are a lot of, I feel like COVID and sort of this like interruption to the organic flow of how work looks is really causing a lot of like conflict and friction between these generations.
Yes. I know I've had conversations where people, like, for example, we're seeing this gray wave that's happening, right? Boomers are starting to retire.
Yes.
They feel as though those in the Gen X, Alpha, they don't work as hard, or they think there's a sense of entitlement. And I really am noticing there's opportunity for better synergies of communication.
Absolutely.
So that we can learn from one another, right? Because there are a lot of things. My mom falls into the baby boomer generation. And there are a lot of things that the work ethic, but I also see myself, I too fall into the same category as yourself. I also see there are things that I'm able to teach like that next generation.
Absolutely.
So I don't believe in work-life balance. I do believe in work-life blending.
Yes.
And being able to see, well, how do I blend my belief systems? How do I blend my values?
Absolutely.
Who I am, that it is okay for me to double down on those. Like, I literally walked away from a job because I'm crying in the parking lot. That's not normal.
No.
Right? That's not normal.
No, and it was so taught to us that that sort of thing is normal, especially for women to like suffer, you know, for this quote unquote opportunity. And now that there's just so much female leadership and so many more independent leadership, people are just seeing like, no, I don't have to do that anymore. I can take a lot of other opportunities or begin my own.
Absolutely. Or begin my own. I like that. So once upon a time, I worked in a career for about 13 years. And then I quit my job and moved to Europe. One of the best decisions I've ever made, right?
Oh, amazing.
So, but my question is, how can leaders discern the difference between like just needing a pause versus I need some mental health support?
Yeah, that's a great question. And you know, I might be a little biased because of my position and like strong values associated with destigmatizing mental health care. I firmly believe that we should look at mental health care the same as how we look at health care. And that's sort of the model that we have at Clara, where, you know, we kind of want to be that community, you know, neighborhood private practice that you can go to when you need to check in on your mental health. And then you can come here for couples counseling if that's something that you need down the road. If your children need some extra support, that can happen here too. You can kind of do that from a variety of different facets. But that's all part of the process and the value and the model of destigmatizing the idea that mental health is just for some people, right? So to answer your question, I truly think that if anyone is in a leadership position, especially a woman in our culture and in our society, sort of connecting on the front end, like a preventative model, is what I would suggest. Because no matter what you are bringing, no matter what your background is, you are bringing your past experiences, your past trauma. And as much as we would like to be like, I'm healthy and I'm ready for this, and truly, like, I mean, you might be very well functioning, being pushed the way that you will be in a leadership position is going to activate some of those experiences and put you in a position that are going to be uncomfortable. So to me, I'm a big fan of looking at things a little bit more preventative and saying, establish with a therapist early. You don't need to find a therapist when you're in crisis. In fact, that is, I think, kind of an older, sort of outdated way that we often look at therapy. And to speak, you know, to your statements about generational differences, oh my gosh, Gen Z, Gen Alpha, they walk in, they're like, you don't have a therapist?
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. And so although it might be, you know, some folks might kind of struggle with understanding the way that Gen Z and Gen Alpha communicate differently and have some different etiquette that shows up in their sort of cultural spaces, they are like, nope, 100%. I need a therapist just like I need a doctor. And the kids are starting to talk about this more openly in schools in a way where it's much, much more normalized. So we really like the way that that is happening, and helping kids see this as something that's not at all unusual. And you don't have to wait until you're in crisis and really, really struggling. You establish with a therapist on the front end, you begin the pieces of that relationship, right? And then when something does happen into the future where you're like, oh my gosh, this is something I could really use some extra support with, then you don't have to make those decisions on the fly at that moment, and you have a soft landing and a place to go.
You know, and I feel to some degree employers are realizing that too,
Yes.
because there are programs like ERP programs,
Yes.
employee resource programs, that a lot of employers are offering now. I know I've had employees take advantage of that as well.
Absolutely.
Things like FMLA, right,
Yes.
Family Medical Leave Act, that's in place. So it's obviously there is some element that people realize, like, if we take care of our people, they'll take care of us.
Absolutely.
So what can we do, and our listeners, our audience that's here, what can we start to do to help to destigmatize, like especially in the Black culture? I don't know if you identify as Black or not. I don't want to make any assumptions.
I do not.
Okay.
And I do not identify as a person of color, which is, something that I do bring to this space and something that I'm humbly aware of.
So what can we do? Because in people of color and in typically in Black communities,
Absolutely.
if you are saying I'm going to a therapist, or I have a psychologist that I speak to, they're like, oh, they're crazy. You just need to bring it to the altar. God's got you. You can take care of it there.
It's
Right?
also,
Right?
I mean, that is not just in that culture. It's very
interesting.
much in many of the, culture that I serve. And I think about how class is a really big factor when it comes to this. Often I find that people that come to therapy when they're looking at it in a way that's destigmatized and they're like, this is just something I need for my holistic health, it's honestly because they had access to it early in life and it was normalized. So that happens to often be folks that have a little bit more resources, right? But I think folks that have come up struggling and they need to think about the value of their dollars in a very different way than some more affluent folks might, are like, well, why would I pay to talk to somebody? I mean, I grew up Catholic. I grew up going to private Catholic schools. There is no way I would have said I was going to a therapist,
Right.
although it probably would have been pretty good for me at the time.
Right. No, I really think, one, if creating spaces like this, conversations like this,
Absolutely.
helps to pull the curtain back, that it's not a
Absolutely.
scary thing, right? Both myself, my husband, we've gone to therapy before we met each other, coming out of past life trauma.
Absolutely.
We've shared that. I think it's one of the things that you mentioned. It's very valuable because even with working with a coach, like, you cannot coach yourself.
Oh, absolutely.
You can't coach yourself. There's the power of the mastermind, right? Having another
Yes.
person to connect with.
Yes.
I'm also thinking a lot about, like, the data that the daily saturation of media. All this different social media that's coming at us. This comparison. I tell my baby girl all the time, honey, comparison is the thief of joy.
Right.
So what can we start to do to, like, even set a boundary around that as a leader? We have some gentlemen in the audience who are here as well, so we don't want to shun them and,
Of course.
listeners.
Of
But
course.
I know for women, a lot of times there's this double bind that we find ourselves in. We can be seen as either competent or
Yes.
likable, but very rarely both. And coupled with the fact that we have to know, when do we need to be seen as competent and when do we need to be seen as likable.
Absolutely.
So it's just this, like, quagmire of montage of experiences and feelings that you're going through
Absolutely.
on a daily basis.
Absolutely.
Couple that with the social media aspect. What can we start to do to set those boundaries?
Absolutely. And your question really sort of harkens back to your previous question or your previous, statement about, culturally what this is like in your community with people of color, having at times very understandably apprehension about this. It's one of the reasons why it's imperative for us to have therapists that are women of color. So we have two therapists at Clara that are women of color. And what I was sort of thinking about, this is kind of branching back to your last question, but I promise it goes into this one too, that there has to be, and this is why I refer to Clara as being holistic and multifaceted, there has to be a number of different ways and angles that we create these therapeutic healing spaces and open the doors to people to come into them, because that traditional model of being like, you come to a clinic and you just come in and it's this like private, secretive thing, that does not help with any of the things that we're talking about. That does not help destigmatize the process. And it also doesn't help people feel like, oh, if there's a woman of color or a person of color in general who's looking to find a therapist, why on earth would they be like, well, I guess I just have to default to this white clinician who's not going to understand what my experience is. So that's very important for us. So we have Dr. Carice Callender and Amber Thomas are two of our women of color that work at Clara, and both of them do they do therapy, they kind of meet their clients where they're at, but they kind of offer these other things that make it a little bit easier and more gentle for people to enter into the process. So for example, Carice offers, she does online groups specifically for Black women. That's what her research area is in. She, is somebody who came to live here from a different country and has that experience that she is also bringing to the table there. And something that's really changed in the therapy world is that we used to, sort of be trained to be like, you're a blank slate. You really don't bring a whole lot of yourself to the relationship. And that is thankfully really changing. It's because it's just not possible.
Right, no.
You bring so much of your experiences to this. And Amber, who I mentioned, she's our community art therapist. Okay. The way that she works is in a more collective way, going out into the community, serving very often young people, and just kind of activating and getting them interested in a more therapeutic programming, like using art, using creativity, and just kind of opening the door to that. So anyway, I kind of segued. But going back to your question about the comparison, I think that this is important because you made that statement about how society and our culture often says that women can't be all of these different things at once. Like we're very sort of binary, and like, you can be a good mom, but can you also be a good employee or a good boss or a good leader?
And we won't even get into the mom guilt because that is so real.
100%. And then I think about, a woman of color or anyone who might be looking to take that step, and they're like, can I still be a powerful person that I need to be to function in my life and also be vulnerable? And I think that people need to see that in spaces like social media. They need to see that this is something normalized and hear people that they look up to and see as very smart, capable, wonderful people like yourself. I'm sure that lots of people hearing that, you and your husband openly talk about going to therapy and that you are leaders in the church and a religious community. That's incredible. That's like a huge innovation, and also it's very courageous, right? Because I'm sure that there are many folks that have other opinions about that. Exactly. So to your point, there is so much data out there, and we are oversaturated with images and media and different versions of what a woman can be or should be, or what just a person should show up as. And you mentioned something before about values.
Yes.
And I think about values a lot, and I think about values a lot with my clients. And so something that I often, encourage people to do is to sort of hone into their core values, right? And we're going to use those as sort of a way to filter and cleanse and create a strategy for what media you allow into your neural space, right? Because it takes it is very expensive.
Yes.
The neurally expensive. So being able to process this information that's coming into your brain much, much faster than our nervous systems are ready for, it's hard for us to make sense of. And often the way that, sort of a negativity bias in our brains makes sense of, oh, that person looks like they're more successful than me, or they're doing more than me, or they have more than me, or they have the life that I want. immediately the story inside of our brains often goes to, oh, there must be me. There must be something wrong with me. I must not be doing something right. And I'll hear these incredible, I mean, most of my clients I look at are just incredible people, incredibly accomplished, truly more functional than they believe themselves to be, right?
So how do we turn the tape off? I mean, how do you turn that off? That negative, what did you say? Negative bias.
Yeah,
How do we turn it off?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think like one of the first steps has to be learning truly how to be okay with taking a pause and taking space and not feeling like you have like opportunities or work or energy that you put forth is scarce and you got to keep going and going and going. And with that pause, that's where we kind of we do have to be somewhat responsible for the media that comes into our headspace, right? So what we're following online, what we are allowing into our conversations, what we're allowing into our conversations at home that we learn about from other people, these things are really important because it might seem just really easy to have these conversations or even just be like, oh, did you see about this horrible thing that happened? But that has an impact on us. That has an impact on our nervous system. We can't undo now knowing that and sort of bringing that into our space, right? And so I often use people's values as a way to filter that and be like, okay, like, does this page, does this influencer, does this content, even does this friend, does the content they produce,
or a family member,
that's probably the primary one, honestly. Truly. And that's very complicated for a lot of people, as you can imagine. But does what they're putting out there into the world, what they're asking of me, what they're asking of others, does that align with my values? And the values that I want to, align with, that I want to reflect out into the world? If it doesn't, you don't have any responsibility to consume that data just because that's a person that you know or even admire.
That's good. So once again, boundaries, right? Setting the boundaries. In my book I wrote about 4 years ago at this point now, called Everyday Business, Conquering What Seems Impossible, that one of my chapters is all about boundaries are bae and how you can set those boundaries and then double down on them, right? And feeling comfortable about it and this is a good thing. It's okay to have boundaries. I do want to tell you to our in-person audience who's here on today, first of all, give yourself a shout out for spending your Saturday here. I mean, give yourself a shout out. Come on, let's hear you. Yes. Congratulations and kudos to you for taking time to invest in yourself. I'm so glad to have you here. I do want to tee it up. If anyone happens to have a question, we do have a few minutes in our segments to be able to ask questions. You can make your way to the microphone that's over here on my left, your right, and Kristin is welcoming questions as well as a part of our segment today. So
please,
as you all are thinking about that, and then also Bishop Robbins is happy to come and bring you the microphone to you too if you prefer not to walk. So as a therapist, what are some grounding tools? So, everybody was invited to bring their journal, for example, today, right? What are some grounding tools or rhythms you'd recommend to prevent that emotional depletion?
Absolutely. So the first thing that comes to mind when you say that is, I mentioned earlier, this idea of like, we don't often have a lot of transition time between the type of energy or the type of relations that we're sort of dealing with or that we're responsible for within a day. Like, so for example, so many of us are used to being so, type AAA that we know how to use every minute and make the best of it. We think, right? And we're rewarded for that, right? By employers, by society. Everybody's like, wow, you get so much done, right? It is not healthy to transition from something like, I think of like for myself, like as intense as a therapy session where I'm helping somebody process, childhood trauma that's very, very difficult. And the moment they walk out of the room, it's like, okay, go get your kid, go do this, go make sure you don't forget to pay that bill, don't forget to do that. And it's because there is just generally too much expected of us. So grounding, I think, really has to start with like working in those like intentional transition spaces where you don't have something planned for that moment of the day. You're kind of planning ahead, you're kind of coping ahead and being like, you know what, I'm going to have an intense afternoon of meetings, or I've got some high pressure things that I have to be working on. I need to sort of work this in because I know that I'm going to be, my nervous system is going to be really, really activated. What goes up must come down. So I need a little bit of time for that to go down and sort of rest and reset, be able to sort of digest what, happened to you for that day and how to make sense of it and make meaning of it. But when I say what comes up must go down, when it comes to the nervous system, is that if we're so keyed up and vigilant and anxious and stressed, it will come down. But the higher you're up and the longer you're up, the lower you'll go and the longer you'll stay there.
Wow.
So in a way, something that I tell people about a lot is that anxiety and depression are actually pretty much two sides of the same coin. If people experience anxiety, it's incredibly likely that they're going to experience depression and vice versa, because it's sort of like it's about rhythms of the nervous system. So we really have to think about what works well for our nervous system. And I really like that term rhythm because we do have to think about what is the best personal rhythm for us. You know your body and your energy level best. You know it better than a workplace does.
Yes.
You know it better even than a client might. And so if that means that you naturally, tend to be really low energy, it's hard for you to focus or concentrate in the afternoon. Okay, I get that not everybody can be like, okay, go take a little siesta, and
Right.
But you should be kind of looking at how to structure your day so that it works with your energy level, with your capacity, so that you can sort of save that precious neural energy for what you really need it for and what you really want to dedicate it to, right?
Yes.
And another piece I would just say is like working silence into your day. So to your point about the media and data saturation, especially with the news cycle and
It's a lot happening right now.
new terrible things happening every
Yes.
moment, new things to be anxious about, new things to be scared of. There is a lot of noise going on inside of our brains all of the time. And if you think about how often you experience just pure silence to give your brain a rest from processing that, that's getting fewer and further between for many, many people. I mean, I even just think about myself as I was getting ready today, I was listening to a podcast, and I do that a lot. And in some ways that really helps me. It helps me kind of stay on course. And of course I love to learn, but I'm like, well, wait a minute. I'm like not even hearing the birds chirping outside.
Wow.
I'm not even hearing, my kids laughing or, something like that I really appreciate and I don't want to miss. So making time for silence. And I think if that silence incorporates prayer or contemplative prayer, meditation, or even just like a silent morning routine that people just dedicate a small amount of space to, I think that can really make a difference.
I love that. Yeah, I started driving home when it's just myself with nothing on,
Nice.
just in total silence. And I just love it.
Yeah.
It's just crazy. I'm just like, oh my gosh, I can hear myself think,
Yes.
process, reframe, get ready for picking up the little or engaging with the rest of the family,
Yeah.
whatever the case might be.
Absolutely.
And to your point too about like routines, for me, I've gotten back into probably about a little over a month now, my morning routine. I'm the first person up in the house. It's 5 a.m. I get my workout in,
Right.
my prayer, I do my devotion. I always read 2 books, one that's dealing with like my spiritual growth. So it could be my Bible or another text,
Yes.
and then another that's dealing with like my professional growth.
Yeah.
And I just sit there and, especially earlier in the spring, the sun is rising. It's just such a
Yes.
nice slow start to the day. And I
Yes.
appreciate that.
Absolutely. It really helps to set the tone for the day and kind of like it gives our nervous system something to kind of anchor itself to. It's like, oh, this feels good. This feels calm. I'm not coming from a place of frenetic energy. So many of us are like really used to being motivated by stress, right? Like, you know, you got to move because there's deadlines. You got to move because somebody's waiting on you. I think about even just my own life. Like I am working on, you know, since I'm meeting with folks all day, every day, I'm on someone else's timeline, you know, and you know, to a certain extent, that's the life I signed up for and the profession I signed up for. But it
You have to set boundaries. Even in
yeah,
that.
yeah, absolutely.
Let me see if we have any questions from our audience at all. Any questions? All right. I think they're processing because it's been so good. Okay, so one final question.
Yes, of course.
What encouragement would you give to the person who's listening who feels functional?
Yes.
They're up, they're ready, they're going to work every day, they're engaging with their family, but they're really fractured on the inside. They're fractured as a leader. What encouragement would you give that listener?
Oh, absolutely. I do think that a lot of folks that wind up in leadership spaces have experienced, many of us have experienced a great deal of trauma. Oftentimes we take a look, we take that trauma and we, you know, sort of in a noble effort to make meaning of it, are like, oh, you know, this is something that, you know, when I think about starting Clara, it's like something that I would have loved for myself and some of my peers growing up. It would have been great to have that sort of comfortable access and be able to be heard as a young person, right? And I think that there's a noble piece to that. But as you grow, you know, having that sort of trauma story be your overarching narrative about why you're doing what you're doing, it kind of takes a toll, right? Yeah. And I think as leaders, we need to create space to grow and evolve and update and revise our narratives, right? So to the person that, you know, to the leader who is likely, you know, just really passionate and purpose driven, they're probably bringing some real personal, you know, experiences to that. I would just say, you know, I would tell them that it is necessary. It is absolutely necessary. It is not a weakness or a vulnerability to need other people and to. That doesn't mean that you're dependent on others. That means that you're connected to others, right?
Love that.
And we're supposed to regulate our emotions socially. We're supposed to share the load as a community. It's something that has, you know, really been pushing us into different silos and away from each other, thinking that we're just these hyper independent, individualistic beings. And I really disagree. I think we're much more collective than we believe. So that's why I think things like church communities, faith-based communities, value-based communities. At Clara, we have a group that's sort of establishing for dads. It's not really even like a clinical thing. People are just going it's actually outside and they're going for hikes with their dads are going for walks and hikes with their kids together. It doesn't have to be, you know, conversations specifically about mental health, but like kind of need to know that like, no, you actually aren't responsible for every little thing around you. We're supposed to live in a collective environment. And I think so many leaders, especially women leaders, they like wear this badge of honor of being like, oh, I'm hyper independent. I can take care of things myself.
Listen.
And it creates a very, very lonely space. Leadership is a very lonely space at times.
You know, I will recall moving in, ascending into leadership, and definitely feeling and believing the narrative.
Absolutely.
I have to do it all, be it all, make it all happen.
Yes.
And then, you know, becoming a wife, becoming a mother, and feeling guilty for having
absolutely.
a team.
Absolutely.
And now I try to encourage like my clients and other women, like, child, you need to get you a team.
Absolutely.
I don't care what that looks like. It could be someone coming to clean your house, or you're farming out the laundry, or you have someone to take care of your little. and be able to work through that, because
Yes.
it does give you more of that bandwidth space.
Absolutely.
Being able to be intentional, like my husband and I, Mondays are a date day for us because we
Right.
work on the weekends,
Absolutely.
right?
Absolutely.
And being really intentional and protecting that time.
Yes.
And I often think about, like, what example are we setting for our children as to what a healthy relationship looks like? And,
Right.
you know, mommy and daddy come back better when they have that time together. And all those things are really valuable and important. All right. I could go on, and we definitely can keep this conversation going. As you know, we have to get you back to the table again for the Grace Over Grind podcast. If people want to connect with you, those who are listening, those who will watch the replay here, where can they connect with you?
Oh, absolutely. So, we're all over the socials, and you can find us online. So our website is just clarahealinginstitute.com. Clara is in all caps. So if you see that you'll know that that's us. We are pretty active on Instagram and all of those sort of spaces. But if you just, hop onto our website, we're very accessible. You can put in, a message inquiry. You can reach out and call. That phone call will come right to me as clinical director. So I'm happy to help with any questions. And even if folks aren't ready or looking to specifically get into a therapeutic relationship with us, I just encourage people to reach out, because our network of people that work for us, we have 8 different therapists. We're all very community minded and very connected to a lot of different resources. We could probably give some information that would help point you in the right direction, even if that's not necessarily like clinical help, right? So I would recommend that anybody do that. We're happy to talk.
Awesome. Can we give it up for Kristin Belkofer again for being here today? Oh my gosh. No, I love having you here. And this conversation was so rich. Did you all enjoy this first segment? All right.
This episode of Grace Over Grind podcast was recorded and edited by Stream Studio MKE by DJ Lee Productions.